Today is Wednesday, September 17th, 2008.
I'm Howard Brown. I was born in Twin Falls, April 3rd, 1933. I'm 75 years old. My dad was born in Bathsheba Springs, Tennessee in 1901. And
his name was?
Frank Edwin Brown, commonly known as Dabber. He got that nickname. My mother was born in Payette in 1909, and that was Mildred Mankin. She was raised in Twin Falls.
Twin Falls. Okay. When did they first come to the Sawtooth Valley?
I would guess 1936 or 37. My dad was a trapper, and he'd been one most of his life.
Okay, did he come here for trapping purposes?
Correct, he did.
And did your mother and father both come here, or just your father?
My mother and father both came here.
Did they come and stay, or did they just come and visit?
No, they came and stayed.
And where did they stay?
First place with Bob Bodenheimer's place. That would be straight across to the east in the Sawtooth hatchery. Next, Frake's place, commonly known as the Arrow A today.
You lived there when the Frakes lived there, or?
No, Frake's owned the hotel.
Okay.
The one across from the Rod and Gun.
Right. Sawtooth.
They had that, and they lived up there. We lived at the Frake's place. And in fact, I had an encounter at the Frake's place with a bear. Myself. I went up to get a bucket of water. Went through the pole fence, straight up, started around the willow. There stood a bear in the spring.
So, with the Frakes place, is that the first place that you lived as a child, or did you?
No, I was at the other place
actually
too.
Up there as well.
I vaguely remember.
Across from the hatchery.
Yeah.
And what age did you come to the valley? Twin Falls was home, and
5.
About 5 years old.
I can't say. I've lived in Twin Falls. I've lived in Salmon.
Okay.
Over on the Persimmon. I lived in Soda Springs. But
you think you were about 5 years old when you came
when
here?
I came here the first time, yes.
Okay.
And then the next time, I would say we were here a couple, 3 years, and then in about 38 or 9 we went out and then came back. That's when we came to the Frakes place.
Okay.
They sold out after that. I believe they went to Victor, Montana.
Your father, his nickname was?
Dabber.
Dabber. And was he a government trapper or a...
At the time we were in here, at the earliest, yes, he was a government trapper. His boss was the outfit was called the Biological Survey.
Right, Biological Survey.
But the first time, the first 2, I'd say here, he worked for that, because he'd get called by people with bear problems and different things like that. The only bear problem he had was behind Maddie's, or in behind that Bodenheimer place.
Was he trapping wolves, coyotes, beaver, bear? What was he trapping the most, and what do you remember about that?
He was after coyotes, fox, mink, marten, bear if required. And that is requested.
And requested.
Yeah, and a request. And he had 2 bear traps.
What do you remember in that trapping? Did he ever talk about any of the exploits or any of the travels, or is there ever any talk of wolves or ever any talk of grizzly bears or anything like that?
Well, Gary, you and I go back a long ways. And I will say this about this valley, and I know this because my own knowledge. The wolves were never vacant from this valley.
Yeah.
I've seen them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I'm not talking about packs of wolves. I'm talking about a very few wolves.
Yes.
I have seen them myself. And in the area of Maze Creek, harrowing, McDonald,
Mm-hmm.
Yellow Belly, Pettit Lake area, I have seen the wolf. And that's before when they were supposed to be extinct.
Right, right. Was there ever any talk, do you recall ever any talk about them back in your early days?
Not really. At that time, they had pretty well been thinned out.
Mm-hmm.
The people here, I can't recall anybody talking about them.
Okay.
Because I'm not too sure the people wanted to keep them.
Right.
I think they wanted to keep them where they had and not make a big history of the wolf. But there were here. And in fact, one big male, and he was big. I've seen him in less than 40 yards.
Since we're speaking about the wildlife that you probably remember pretty well, tell us about any wildlife memories you have. Was there sage grouse? Was there big deer? Was there elk? Tell us about what you remember.
I don't remember elk. I mean, I'm talking about years ago. I'm not
Right,
talking about
exactly.
now. Years ago, there wasn't elk. There was never antelope either, which they're here now.
Mm-hmm. Right.
There was deer, mule deer. That's it. And there was some big deer in this valley. And they weren't hunted as like they are today.
There wasn't much hunting pressure there.
No, the pressure wasn't there. People didn't know about this country until later years.
Did you do hunting with your father or anyone in your younger years? In
I've
this
been with
area?
him, yes. Pettit Lake area was one of the main ones.
Pettit Lake area.
Till the
Okay.
10th of October.
For deer until the 10th, but not after that?
They go bye-bye.
Yes, they certainly
They
do.
can move out. I don't care if it's just like this. They still move out.
That's right, they do. Okay, how about, since we're talking about animals and such, what do you remember about fish in this area? Did you ever go fishing? Was fishing a big deal?
Well, it wasn't a great sport in the summer because of the tributaries, the salmon, Lake Creek, Valley Creek were full of salmon. I mean, back then they were getting them with hands, gigs, anything they could get them with. They're the ones that came in here, and there was thousands of salmon. And then the redfish, of course. That stream run red with redfish.
Redfish Lake Creek.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh. Did anybody fish on those redfish?
I can't recall it because I don't know. I think the people kind of had it at the time they had turned that color. They were no good.
Uh-huh.
There was there was good fishing, better fishing elsewhere for better fish. One of the things is whitefish. They used to really go after those and smoke them and everything else.
Mhm.
I don't know whether they still do or not.
Yes. So, whitefish. How about cutthroat trout or rainbow trout?
Yeah,
Remember anywhere
yeah.
that was particularly interesting?
I remember one lake that they used to go to quite often. That was Stanley Lake.
Okay.
And remember that used to be pretty good fishing. In the early days, there used to be another lake below Alturas. I think it's called Perkins.
Perkins Lake.
And that thing in the spring of the year was awesome for fishing.
Was it for bull trout or for Dolly Varden? Do you remember? It was
Dolly Varden, I know. I'm not sure about the bull trout.
How big a fish do you remember?
No, of course you get them 8, 10 inches long. That was a nice fish then. But you would get a big fish every now and then, and they weren't planted that much.
Right. Okay.
But probably I would say, like my dad, if he was quite a fisherman, the river.
Did he fish for salmon? Did your father fish for salmon? Okay.
They caught them with their hands. Back in those days, I don't know whether there was even a law on them or not, really.
And when you say those days, what era are you speaking
Oh, I'm
of?
talking back in the 40s,
In the 40s. Yeah.
30s and 39, 40, 41, and that era.
Your earliest recollections of coming up here, what was it like to travel? How did you travel? Did you come in the spring and leave in the fall, or did you come and live for the whole year? And if you did, let's talk about it.
Well, yeah, I lived, we would come in generally in the spring or summer, get lined up, and it's trappings in the winter. It's not in
Yes,
it
it is.
That's trappings in the winter.
What was it like to travel here from Twin Falls?
Well, back then, it was a very interesting trip, especially when you had Galena Summit.
What was Galena Summit like?
A nightmare.
Describe it.
Oh, I
And
mean,
what kind of a
switchbacks,
car? What did you
ones-
travel in?
Oh, we had a Chevy, I think. 29 Chevy.
Huh?
And you come over the road, and I remember a couple of things I've heard them talk about. They'd get a Model T, and they'd get to the top of the hill, and then they'd cut a lodgepole or a tree down top of the hill and drag it down the hill because the brakes wouldn't hold it.
To slow them down.
Yeah, to slow them down. That's when you find all the trees at the bottom of the hill.
Uh-huh.
But it was a nightmare road. And I do remember something else in later years. The road was beyond, it wasn't impassable. It was so rough you couldn't, I mean, you can't believe how bad that road was. Gravel.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember when I lived right over here at the Cawthorn place. I think it was a Cawthorn, it could have been Frakes, when they brought the pontoons in for the dredge
Uh-huh.
over Galena.
So they brought them in over Galena. And when you say for the dredge, tell us which dredge you mean.
Yankee Fork Dredge.
Okay. And how'd they bring them in? You remember seeing it?
I've seen them come through here. They had, I don't remember what kind of trucks, old trucks, come down here to one pontoon. And at that, they were big. They were huge. And then you'd see them come down the river, and they'd go on down the river. And I would like to know to this day of how they got them over the summit, over those switchbacks.
And that would have been in the late 30s, or was that much later? Because I don't have those dates.
I remember when I lived here. We lived here at Cawthorn, and we lived there at Frakes. It's the only two times we were down in here that I can remember. We either were at the Frakes or at Cawthorn.
And that would put it about what years?
Cawthorn would be in the 46, range.
Okay.
But then to be at the Frakes would be back in the 30s again.
You came over from Twin Falls, and it was a rough trip, and you stayed at these various places. What was life like? What was it in the summer? What did you do in the fall? What did you do? What happened when you became school age? Let's just kind of move into.
Well, I was at the Frakes place, and I got to come to school age. And we come across, and my dad had to come down and help me. And we come across the footbridge below the Frakes place. When you come out of the Frakes place, you come all the way along that hill over there, down to the Cawthorn place. You use the Cawthorn Bridge.
Okay.
That's what it was then. My dad was in on building the first bridge to the Frakes place, or the Arrow A. The Arrow.
And just to clarify, that's now the Niter Ranch, the Arrow A Ranch.
Used to be Fiddler.
It's been the Fiddler family, the Frakes family, and then downstream the Cawthorn. What's the Cawthorn's first name? Do you remember? That would be now where Ken Smith's place is, and it was also an old
All
hotel.
I know is I know him, Doc Cawthorn.
Doc Cawthorn. Okay, that's what we wanted.
And his wife's name was Effie, I believe.
Okay. Okay.
And they had a daughter, name was Mildred.
So you would get across the footbridge and school. So it's a school day. So what, tell us about that.
I went to the old school.
And that's the school before the Quonset hut.
That is, yes. I never went to Quonset hut.
Yeah, the Quonset hut came in about 47, so
48.
48.
Because I was there in 46, 47.
Okay. So tell us about school. Who do you remember was the first teacher that you had, and what was school like?
McMaster. Now I got to remember how many classes was in the one room. 6th, 7th, and 8th, I believe.
Okay.
And the other side was the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and it could have been the 4th and 5th in the other room. I remember that. And I've been in both rooms. The Maddie was my first one. Then when they lived at Pettit Lake, I stayed in Twin Falls.
Okay.
Because there's no way of getting back and forth to the school.
Right.
And teacher, when I came back in here at the Cawthorn, his name was Hedrick.
Okay.
And that went till Christmas. After that, he was removed from the school. And there was a lady came in. Her name was Croft, Mrs. Croft. And had us for the rest of the year.
Okay. Your school recollection, not necessarily the kids, but what was it? What was a school day like? I mean, for instance,
Well,
did you bring your lunch? Did you have to heat the place? Did they have chores?
no, okay, yeah, we brought our lunch when we were at the school until later years. They had a hot lunch program, and it was done by seems like the lady's name was June Terry, Sandra Terry's mother. Had the cafe up in Stanley.
Okay.
And we went down there and we'd have soup or something like that. And that was a real treat then.
Yes. How many kids were in a classroom typically?
That's a long time ago.
Oh, I know it.
I would say there wasn't over 30.
You remember how far some of the kids had to travel to school, or were they all from right in town?
No. It seems like at the two, they had two buses. Not buses, they were two limos. One of them went downriver, one of them went up. The one that went up, when I was in here, the Galena was not open.
Right.
The steel bridge up in the valley was the end of it. We had people coming out of McVeigh Place, and that was Owens's. There was three, I believe there was three. There was a boy, a girl, two boys, and a girl.
And they were coming out of which place?
McVeigh Place.
And which place is that?
The one on your same side as 4th of July Creek. It's the old ranch back up in the mouth of 4th of July Creek. I think that the southern bus went to Torrey's. I think in the area of Torrey's, and that's it.
Well, that river road must have been something.
Oh,
back
it was. It was. I remember who used to haul the mail.
Who did
Harry
that?
Fleming.
Harry Fleming hauled the mail.
Yeah, hauled the mail. I remember he lost it down there below Sunbeam. Went in the river, and it broke up pretty bad.
So did you have sports at school or activities?
Not well. That hill over there by the school, we used that. We had toboggan runs down it, and that's mainly it. And skied or any kind of a winter, but there is no sports that could be done. We had no place to do them.
Right. So you didn't have a ball field or anything like
No,
that? Really?
no, we didn't. No, and they had get-togethers and things like that.
Well,
with the schools and
so get-togethers. What did the community do for get-togethers? What do you remember? Any kind of activity or
they had
get-togethers?
some kind of a deal at the school for Halloween. And then they had a Christmas program, and they had a program in the schools themselves, and they'd get together, and it was a very fun place to live in the winter. It wasn't sit home and look at the snow.
So the school teacher that you remember the most was Maddie, and you said Maddie McMasters. Do you know
right.
what her husband's name, or did she have a husband? Or?
Yeah, her husband passed away. That's all I know. I don't know a lot about Maddie.
Okay.
I know her maiden name though, Jensen. She's from Kimberly.
And that was the McMaster, not the Hanson.
That's correct. Well, that was, yes, it was the Hanson. Maddie married Cliff Hanson.
That was Chuck Hanson.
Chuck Hanson.
Let's talk about home and the store and what was family like and how did you get groceries and
We had two grocery stores in the later years. One uptown,
what was it called?
Stanley Merck. No. There was three. There was a Merck. Was it Gregory's?
Gregory's
later
store.
year.
Okay. Yeah.
And then the one at Markle's.
Markle's store. Right.
And Savage.
And
Somebody else,
Speak
somebody
to
by
the
the name of
Savage.
Savage got a hold of that.
Savage got a hold of the Markle store, correct?
And then Markle came back and took it back. I mean, got it back. I don't know whether they repoed it or what they did, but anyway, Floyd Markle
Right.
got it back.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Okay.
let's talk about the legend. John and Mary, Rockavina.
Okay.
Casino Club. She was quite a lady. They were quite the people.
Mary Rukavina.
Mary and John. I know they had a big cat, and a big one, bigger than what Fritzy. And he'd sleep on the bar.
Was that bar a rowdy place or was it
No.
a gathering
John and-
place?
Kind of a gathering place in the winter. Nothing else was open.
Well, now wasn't that right next door to the Four Aces Club?
There was no Four Aces Club.
Okay.
It's called the Ace of Diamonds.
Ace of Diamonds. That's right.
That was a dance hall.
There you go.
No, I remember that. Then across the street was a service station. That was one of the original service stations. And Juggy Niece ran that service station. The old hand pump. And the old timers here. Suze Vaughn was, I don't know what she was, but she was the character. Suze was a nurse, if I remember correctly. She was kind of a medical, if something happened, that's who everybody went to. Back then it got so cold. This country here don't know what cold's all about now. 55 below.
When it was cold like that, what did that do to the community? What was it like?
Nothing. It was cold, but it's a dry cold. And it's a different cold. It's a different world than people out there know. It's you do what you want to do.
Did you still have school when it was cold?
Yes, we did. They didn't close the school because it was snowing. And you get a whiteout, we still had the school. Very seldom you'd ever find that school shut down for any reason. Because these people are used to this.
So when it was cold, how cold was it in the house? What did you do to stay warm in the house?
Build a fire. I'm not dumb. I'll build a fire in the stove.
You go through a lot of wood?
Yeah, we had old pot-bellied stoves and not the modern things today.
How much wood did you remember they put in? A lot?
That's a good question, Gary. I wouldn't say then. I'd say at least 5 cord.
Didn't have chainsaws either. How did
crosscut saws. Crosscut saw in a Model A truck. The biggest man in this valley that cut wood was Lanier.
Which Lanier?
Barney.
Barney Lanier.
Barney Lanier and his Model A. I and his oldest son, which would be in Wayne, went up to Redfish. And this is before the snow. We had to get the tractor out of there. Barney lived, okay, you want to know where he lived? He lived in the old hotel. The old hotel.
Now, do you mean
down across the
Benner?
Down across the
Crick?
Yes.
The Benner Hotel.
The old Banner Hotel.
Okay.
And that's the only one. I don't know how many kids he had, but he had enough to fill it.
Okay.
Now, you talk about staying warm. That's the one I've always questioned. And he cut wood. He had an old short wheelbase Model A truck.
How far did they travel out to cut wood?
Oh, you didn't have to go very far. He was up to Redfish and a few miles.
So it went through a lot of wood to keep warm in the winter.
Yeah.
Were most of the houses log homes or were they lumber homes?
No, they were mostly log at that time. In fact, I would say 90% of them were because they didn't have the lumber. There was there was 2 sawmills in this valley.
And they didn't have electricity, did they?
No, we had dynamos. Well, that's what they call a dynamo. It battery charge, and then it would automatically start and keep the batteries up. That's what was there at these places. We had no electricity in this whole damn town.
So you didn't have electricity. So, gosh, when it got dark in the evenings,
you had kerosene lantern. You had battery.
Okay. And
radios.
You had radios. Was radio a big thing?
Oh yeah.
So how about refrigeration?
Ice.
What was it like? What did your mother, for instance, have to do for keeping produce, keeping meat?
Ice house. Well, you had an ice house.
Did everybody have an ice house? Or
I'm not sure about that, Gary. The only 2 I know is the one down here, but the big one was down at the station at Jason's. And that house that they built down there, that they put together down there, that Wells put together and lived in, was an old ice house. They'd bring it down by sled from Redfish. They'd cut it out of Redfish and bring it down here.
Did they cut it?
Go down, you could go down and buy it.
Did they take and buy ice from the service station, take it to their home?
Yes. Yeah.
So
Yeah, you could.
each home had kind of an ice house.
Had
type
an
of
old ice box or something like that.
thing? Okay.
And of course your nights get cool enough to keep stuff down a little bit. And
When you were young, did you have playmates or brothers, sisters, or
No.
friends? What did you have for
I'm an only
activities?
child.
You're an only child. So what did you do for activity as a child?
You make your own activities. You make your own activity. You fish. You do. Like I lived at Pettit Lake, we'd fish out there in the lake, or we'd swim in the lake in the summers, and there was always something. You make your own.
And you mentioned living out at Pettit Lake. Tell us about that.
That was a nice place because those places were all very nice, but the pump house was not. Every one of those had water in them, way back in the 30s, because they had their own pump. They had their own mag engine on a pump out of the lake, but it wasn't. You got water out of the lake at that time, and there was no one else over there. No one was in. The only place that was in, the big lodge as you go into Pettit Lake, that wasn't finished. The one end of that house was finished, and that's where we lived.
Now, when you're describing living at Pettit Lake, do you mean near the Brooks place, or
Lived at the Brooks place.
At the
It was
Brooks
called the
place.
McDonald place.
McDonald place? Okay, and that's out on the point.
Well, that's around to the right.
Right, exactly.
Go out to the point, yes.
Yes. Did you winter? Did they winter at the McDonald place at Pettit Lake?
Correct.
That's a lot more winter there than it is in Stanley.
Correct.
You have any memories of that?
I don't. I wasn't in here. I didn't stay there in the winter. I was in later years in school, so I stayed in Twin Falls.
So you stayed in Twin Falls. Now, did your mother stay in Twin Falls with you?
No. I stayed with my grandparents.
Okay, okay. And what years would have that been when they were staying at Pettit Lake?
40, 39, oh, wow, wait a minute. Well, 40, 41, 42, in that area.
Okay.
And then we went out and came in here in 45 or 46. And we left here the last time in 40. My granddad died this July 3rd in 1947.
That's when the family moved out of Stanley.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, I've came back a lot.
Absolutely, understand. When you were living here and pretty much from year to year in the late 30s and into the 40s, what do you remember as being the big industry or the big activity here for people to make a living? What did most people do?
Well, there was only one activity. That was what you could pick up from tourists that did come in on the salmon fishing in the summer in their highway department. Just about it. I mean, there wasn't any big industry here. They had a few stores and they had some little ranches in here, of course. A lot of those people came into town to winter. Harry Fleming came in, Merritt's came in. They all lived here in town, and mostly in Upper Stanley. And that's
So did cattle and horses winter over here?
no, they took them out.
Took them out. Okay.
Doc Cawthorn's went to Chalice, and a lot of them went out to Twin Falls, Gooding. I knew one of the biggest sheepmen years ago in here. He was a good friend. J.W. Bill Newman. He owned Decker Flats, he owned Maze Creek Meadows, he owned that whole mess one time.
So the one of the biggest sheep herders you recall was J.W. Newman.
J.W. Bill Newman and Flat Top. I believe that was Peavy. I think it was out of Cary, I think. Then there was another one they called, his name was Clyde Bacon. He was in here too.
Okay.
There was quite a few sheep people in here. But in the summer, they were in here.
Do you remember the Forest Service being active in the area?
Yes. I knew two of the rangers, Charlie Langer Peak.
Mm-hmm.
They went in looking for a 17. It crashed a B-25 under there and killed him, and the ranger that took over behind him was Roland. And every time he would go out to do anything, he had a stuffed tailed cat that wasn't worth a hoot, and he'd bring it over. We'd have to babysit the cat. His name was Stumpy.
Uh-huh.
He's crazy.
Okay, and that ranger station was basically just across the river from...
Yeah, that's about a Creek
Catherine
Ranger
place.
Station. There was 2 ranger stations. One of them was not manned.
So do you remember the plunge or the hot springs?
Yeah, we'd go in there all winter.
You went there.
Mm-hmm. Somebody, some place around here, now I don't know who did it, but somebody put a stove in one of the dressing rooms. I'm not sure it wasn't over at the ranger station. And they'd take and put her over there, and you'd take your own wood. Build a fire in that thing. It was nice and warm. You get out, but it didn't take long to get up those steps and into that dressing room when it's 30 below zero.
Right.
I remember one thing out here, when it gets past 40, you know exactly when it gets past 40.
Why is that?
You can hear the logs going off from the pole fences, like shotguns.
You hear them cracking.
Yeah. I told you my dad helped build a bridge across to the Arrow A.
Mm-hmm.
Poles came out of that canyon right over there.
Just behind the arrowway.
Yeah, right back up in there,
Mm-hmm.
toward Sunny Gulch.
Mm-hmm.
And Dad was one of them bringing them out, and they had a kind of like a front tongue of a wagon, but they just had that wagon, and they'd get the poles up on the bridge poles up on the front of it, and they'd drag them, but they were on the wheels in the front, and then they'd drag them down, because that whole thing over there is a marsh. You couldn't get them across it, so they'd come down there, and then they had to take, when they put the road down there, they put poles under the road, because you might lose the Model T in that one.
There's a photograph that you showed me of your father with the coyotes. Can you talk about that? Do you remember him doing a lot of trapping?
Yes, my dad trapped for years.
Did they make a living off of those traps
Yes.
and trapping?
Yes,
Did he make a good living?
Yes, because even during the Depression, the pelts were worth something. Pelts were worth $25, $30 each. Back when you couldn't get nothing for anything. Okay, when he was a government trapper, I'll finish that one real easy, because they kept their pelts. Today, a government trapper turns his pelts in, puts them, dries them, turns them in, puts them, and they go to, I believe, Ogden. I think it's where they would be bid out there and they sold.
Right.
Well, that was part of the living of a government trapper. He kept his pelts and was able to sell his pelts.
Back when your father, Frank Brown, was trapping, do you recall Trapper Fisher or Trapper Green?
I remember Trapper Fisher myself. His old Grandpa Fisher lived out across the meadow. It's been years and years ago. He was, oh my God, I don't know what he was, just 100 when he died, I think. But yes, I do. I've heard it. I know of him. I know of Green. But I knew Trapper Fisher. In fact, we've gone out to Trapper Fisher's.
Trapper Fisher,
I think was a friend of his.
do you remember him being an interesting character?
Oh, was he a character? If I remember right, he's the one that every time they'd get something going to Stanley, he played the fiddle. That's him. That's him. And I remember he was pretty good at it, too. By the way, my dad quit the trapping for the U.S. government when they were trying to force poison.
Uh-huh.
And the government was forcing the poison.
Okay.
So that's when he split with the government and went on his own as a trapper. He went on beyond that as a trapper.
When he was living here, trapping obviously wasn't a full-time thing. Most of the trapping was in the winter. What did he do the rest of the year? Do you recall?
I think he worked for Lee over there. He worked
Lee who?
in Agnes Brakes.
Okay.
And he worked for them and in maintenance and stuff like that. And he he made some money caretaker as the McDonald place,
Okay.
and then he'd do odd jobs summer.
You speak really, really well of your father. And I'm wondering about your mom. There must have been some pretty hard times for a woman here. What was it like?
She
for your
loved
mom?
it. She loved it up here.
Do you remember her cooking for the family? Do you remember getting up early? Because obviously there was wood stove cooking. There was when your father was a trapper, he was out and going a lot. So what was it like for your mom?
Well, he was gone, but he was on horseback when he could, and on snowshoes. And back up in the high country.
So tell me, if it was coming on winter, what about something like Thanksgiving or Christmas? Or what were seasons like that like?
Most of the time we'd go out at Christmas. We'd stay in here, and Thanksgiving we'd go out for Christmas. You go down to Clayton, go up East Fork, and go out through Spar Canyon. That was the fastest way out.
What was the snow depths that you remember, say, in Stanley at either of the places you lived versus the snow up
Stanley don't have it. Stanley's not known for its snow.
How about Pettit Lake?
Let's not talk about Pettit Lake, because it gets, 5 to 6 feet.
Mm-hmm.
If Stanley has got 2.5 to 3 feet, it's got snow. But Stanley is the low spot of this whole valley and doesn't get the snow. You go to Pettit, Alturas, and go to Bull Trout. You've got 20 degrees difference, and you've got 3 times the snow. The snow gets in there, across these peaks, it does not yet. When you go through that gap up there, it starts building up the valley.
So the winters were cold and harsh, and home life had to be pretty tough, pretty harsh in the winter. But they still got plenty of groceries in here. There wasn't ever any issues that way.
No.
Of course, you ate game meat, right?
Well, we had game. The stores were open. You had 2 stores open, and sometimes 3.
Somebody had to be trucking stuff in.
Yeah, they were trucking stuff in. And by the way, in the summer, there used to be a guy coming here in an old Ford truck with produce.
So if they brought supplies in the winter, that was coming up the river.
That was coming up the river. That would come in from Chalice, yes. Now it can come in from anywhere.
Well, we have here a shopping list that appears to be from 1941. Can you tell me about that?
That was my mother and dad's, and at this time they lived at Pettit Lake. And this was September 1st, 1941.
And September 1st, 1941, they went shopping, and were they shopping for a few weeks, a few days, a few months? What were they shopping for?
It's time to get the stuff for the winter. They went to the store at Haley, and at that time they borrowed my grandfather's old Model A truck.